setting us up on the stream so that Colin can have a look at it and see as well.
Okay.
Then we'll take it from there. Setting us up on the stream so that Colin can have a look at it and see as well. Okay, thank you. So it's joining us now. So that's great. Cool. Hi, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. He's still connecting.
He's still coming on with the audio.
Right, hopefully you're with us now. Thank you, sir. You're with us now.
Yes, I am.
Wonderful, wonderful. We can hear you.
What's up, Tank?
Oh, hey, what's up?
Good.
Great. Okay, excellent. I haven't heard from Yandiswa Sipo. I don't know if you heard anything from Yandiswa. And I know she didn't respond to the other email, but so unfortunately, Ingrid and Jeanette will not be joining us. We know of Jeanette. Unfortunately, something came up today. Ingrid has asked if, due to her workload and her doctorate, that if she can be excused. But we will keep in touch with her and keep her posted in terms of what we're discussing and what is going to come out as a think tank. So what we would like to do, I think what we should do is we should continue and with who is in the room at the moment, and we'll take it from there. So just in terms of your responses, thank you so much to all of you for your responses. Very interesting what has come through. So and I think what we should do is I don't know what happened there. And with who is in the room at the moment, and we'll take. I'm getting some feedback. I don't know where that's coming from. So okay, that was better. Maybe it's. Yeah. So what we thought we would do today is to ask everyone to just pick out from your response in terms of what is good assessment now, to pick out what you believe is the most important point. And we're just going to look at that on each one of you for about 2 or 3 minutes to spend on that. And then we're going to have a discussion. So it's going to be very much an open discussion, talking about the points and your perspective on good assessment now. Some of the information, as I said, was very interesting that came through, and a lot of commonality in what came through, but also some really interesting points. So it's going to be very good to go through and discuss those and get everybody's opinions and thoughts on those, and we'll then have an open discussion on that. And as we get towards the end of the hour, we will then look at how we take this forward and what we believe the next steps are going to be. What we have realized out of the process is that we are mindful of burdening you with a lot of information and asking you to do a lot of preparation. And so what we will look at for the next session is we will give you some thinking to do, but not necessarily formal preparation for the meeting, so that we don't take too much of your time. And we really regard it as very much of a think tank and an open discussion as we take this forward in terms of what we're looking at. And we will be also in the process of this month, there are a number of other people who we are in the process of contacting and to include in these discussions. We may look at even going into breakout rooms if there are a number of people, or we're looking at parallel sessions. And but so far it's been a very interesting journey that we've been on, and thank you very much to every one of you for your contributions so far. So thank you. So less of me talking, and I think really just down to every one of you. And what I think I'll do is maybe Alan, if you can start for us, please, if you could just give us a sense of what you believe the most out of the points that you have raised and the things that have come through from your side. What do you believe is key or most critical in terms of good assessment now?
I mean, I had to, when I got the questions, it was really quite interesting because it was very, very personal, and I had to kind of, it was really, really helpful because I know what I think professionally, but I kind of had my own family situation and work situation that to kind of guide me. And I think assessment cannot be damaging to the children. And because in the UK, we have a whole kind of mixture of selection and selection by stealth around, and that really damages children, especially when it's done at 11. So in my own family circumstances, my parents, my mother were past, it was called the 11 plus. So it was past the 11 plus. She went to the grammar school, my father didn't. And when I kind of got my head around it, I realized why he was the way he was, because he was suffering from this failure at 11. And there's been a lot of programs a few years ago on the news in the UK about the damage that it has, people being labeled a failure at their early adolescence. And because of that, I mean, I'm really against selection. But also it's still going on. In Northern Ireland, you have the transition test, which is the 11 plus for the grammar schools. And it's this idea of at a point in time, you judge people, and it's like separating the sheep from the goats. And so for me, assessment has to be, it can't be as damaging and as kind of clear cut as that. And so when I looked at question one, what does assessment have to do with good education, your view? I mean, I found it quite a simple question to answer. A teacher has to use some information to make a decision about the next steps for the pupil, and it can't be simple recall. But also the child has to be aware of what's required of them. So I was involved in a project where good assessment involved doing things with the children, but also doing things with the teachers. So the teachers in this country, teachers get judged on lessons. And there's a huge problem with the observer effect. And there was some research recently that said when inspectors are judging lessons, there's only 0.6 agreement between highly trained observers. So if you've got two people who aren't highly trained observing, it's less than chance. Less than 50%. And so what that means for teachers is they can be observed by one person who likes them, one person who doesn't, and that can kind of have a trajectory for their career. So I think good assessment has to work both with the professionals and with the children. And so what they found with the children that we're doing in this project was if children were very aware of the criteria by which they were being judged, they could self-assess and support each other and give each other feedback. So for me, I would want to see a strong element of that within it. And so what they ended up doing in those schools that were being judged in those ways, teachers could opt, because what would happen is 3 times a year, you would have an observation, like a judgment. And so they said, you can have 2 of those observations where you're not in the classroom. You can go and do something with a colleague. You can plan lessons. You can do some development. You can do some reading. And so what they did was they went in and they spoke to the children and asked the children, looked at the books and said, because we have a whole system of peripheral things to help assessment, so stickers and stamps. And so these schools got rid of the stickers and stamps, and they would ask the children, rather than say what people would have, they would have a stamp that said verbal feedback VF, and it didn't mean anything. So they would say, has your teacher helped you? And so in some schools, teachers would opt to have 2 observations when they weren't in the room. And it was also a way of getting a sense of what the children thought. So to me, it is a mixture of everything. You do need some. My daughter's doing veterinary science. There are certain criteria she needs to meet, like an MOT for your car. So we do have to have that element, but I think there has to be balanced with some kind of responsiveness where the child is aware. That was the whole industry with Paul Black and Dylan Williams with formative assessment. A child must be aware of where they need to go. And they have to be aware of that. And a lot of children just aren't. So they just do what the teacher tells them. They don't understand it. And they actually haven't developed the understanding they need to do the difficult questions. So they'll say things like, when asked about nuclear submarines, they'll say, you didn't teach us about nuclear submarines, but the teacher taught them about nuclear power. You cannot apply it from the context in which they're given because everything is so tightly limited, and it's almost as if the more able children can do that and the others never get anywhere rather than involving them in the process. So I think I've run out of things to say.
Yeah, it's
Take
brilliant.
a pause for breath.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. That's great. Thank you so much. Tankisa, I'm going to move through to you now. We're not doing ladies first today. Sorry, Linda. You're the rose amongst the thorns today. Yeah. So, so Tankisa, if you could please give us your perspective.
Okay, cool. So one of the questions that we had there was, thinking back on your own experiences, do you genuinely feel anxious or excited when assessed, and why? And I think one of the things that I said is that I genuinely feel anxious because there's a lot riding on that particular assessment, and I think this thing was also reflected today, right? Today I had to prepare for some mock assessment at work, and it did not go well, right? And it's simply because there's just so much pressure on that assessment, and it's something that I do every day. But ordinarily, under normal circumstances, I do well with the negotiations and whatnot. But because I was placed in a situation where I was told, okay, look, we're assessing you, and and this is what we want to gain from this assessment, it placed so much pressure, and I think sometimes those kinds of assessments aren't a true reflection of one's abilities and how one would perform under normal circumstances. So I think there's an opportunity to sort of review how how we assess learners. And then also another thing that we're looking at was what are some of the things that we should be assessing. And I strongly do believe that some of the key things that should be assessed are things such as creative thinking, collaboration, and teamwork, right? And the reason for this is because we live in a constantly evolving world. Right? So what I was doing yesterday is different from what I'm doing today, right? And there's certain things that I learned in high school and even at university that I don't use today. Right? I remember I was having a conversation with a friend, and they were talking about, the body parts of a grasshopper. And I said, I have no idea what those body parts are, right? And, and people are assessed on such things which don't necessarily add much value, right? And I think some of the things that I've learned were really just how to collaborate better with people, right? How to think creatively. And those are the sorts of skills that I believe should be assessed because they are applicable, under a different set of circumstances, right? And I think I've, in my very limited number of years of working, I've worked in sort of very different industries, right? At some point I did tax, I'm in sales. At some point I worked in food. And I think, there's been sort of a common thread, which I believe has been, very important in enabling me to function optimally in, in the different spaces that I've been in. And, it's the skills that I gained where I had to think creatively, right? Because there's a certain level of creativity that is required, in the different sort of, working spaces that I've been in. I've had to work with people, and I think currently that's like the biggest thing that I have to do on a daily basis. It's how to manage people, you know, how to manage people's expectations and those sorts of things, right? And I think if we can place a greater emphasis on those sorts of skills that are transferable, I think, you know, it will, you know, definitely add to, you know, to education. Right? Not to say that other things aren't important. I mean, it's definitely important to have an understanding on a lot of the technical things that, you know, that one needs to learn. So if you're going to be a doctor, it's not enough that you can work with people. You actually do need those sort of technical skills. So that's not to take away from those, but I'm just saying in addition to that, it's important that we place an emphasis on these transferable skills. And those are the things that I believe we should assess.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. And that was a theme that certainly came through very strongly in your written, in the feedback that we got from you. So thank you very much for raising that again. Certainly got our minds thinking on this side around that, which was really good. So Linda, to you, in terms of your feedback on the sort of key points from your side.
Okay. I think, first of all, for me is important is kind of this distinction between a test and an assessment. So I feel very sad that these days, certainly at school, we seem to be writing tests all the time. So it's test, 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 and not assessing. And your question about constructive and destructive assessment made me think back to when was teaching more fun for me, and that dreadful OBE time period. What the one really amazing thing that came out of it was that it forced us to be creative and to do other forms of assessment. It was horribly prescribed and so on, but it forced us to be creative with assessing, because tests as such counted only a little bit. So you've got to do tests, because otherwise you don't know if knowledge has been transferred. But to be creative with collaborative assessments, you can't send them home, because then the parents compete and they do the project. So you have to have time to do it in school. And obviously, if you're doing it in school, then you are teaching that collaboration that Tankisa was talking about. And so the example that I gave you, which we just don't seem to have time to do anymore, was this lovely trigonometry assignment where grade 11s do 2D trig and grade 12s do 3D trig. And so I said, why don't we let the grade 11s take their knowledge? So we first taught them the knowledge, and then we presented them with 3D trig problems, real life problems, and they had a choice. And they had to construct a model. We said, bring cheap stuff, cardboard boxes and string and so on. And so they had to construct the model to scale, and then solve the problem by their construction, and then finish off by solving the problem mathematically on paper. So how would you answer it in an exam? And then we had a follow-up test where we picked a question from those that they had to construct. So they wrote a test sort of to sum up what they'd learned. They had so much fun doing the project that it really, to them, it didn't feel like an assessment at all. And I had so much fun watching them doing it, because we did it all in class. We seemed to have time and nobody lost out. And it was thoroughly enjoyable. And at the end of it, I could have probably told you what every boy was going to get for his test simply by watching him do the assessment. So for me, that was constructive. It was bringing all the senses and the collaboration and the 3D vision. And we'd taught them something that they needed to know for the following year. So that was the constructive. The destructive, I actually thought of another example after we'd written this, and I will bring it in quickly now. When my son was in primary school, he wrote a life orientation test, I think it was, and one of the questions was list the colors of the rainbow. And so he wrote the colors of the rainbow, but my children are alternative thinkers. And so instead of going red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, he wrote them the other way around, which is awesome. I mean, he thinks that way. And when he came home with his test, he got 0 out of 7 for that question. And it was, and so he thought he was a failure. I mean, he almost failed the LO test. And I said to him, what was the question? And he said it was list the colors of the rainbow. And so I went back to the teacher and I said, what was the problem with his answer? And she said, no, it was in fact a tool, a learning tool that they'd taught them for something else. And the learning tool was RO, so red, orange, yellow. So it was the first letters. But the question was completely useless at best and destructive at worst, because he didn't know that it was meant to be a tool. So I went back to her as petty as anything and said, well, at least he could have got 1 out of 7 because the middle color was still the middle color. But yeah, that's not the point. The point is, first of all, are you assessing what you're asking? Is the child clear? I think, as Alan said, is the child clear? What are you asking? And then, does he know the colors of the rainbow? Absolutely, yes. So now you're telling him he's stupid. Yeah. So, and then the example that I gave in my feedback, which I'll wrap up with, was an Afrikaans comprehension, I think, that our boys had written. It was an external exam. And I can't remember what the question was, but it was an opinion. Do you think? And justify your answer. And unfortunately, it had a very strong religious connotation to the question. And so the boys had answered using their beliefs and then justified accordingly. And those that had answered in a way which was different to the memo had got 0 for the question. And obviously, justifiably, they were distraught because this is what I believe and I have justified it. And so my comment there was, when you are assessing, don't ask for an opinion unless the mark is for the justification of the opinion. You cannot mark somebody's opinion right or wrong. You can assess them on their justification of their opinion. So those were examples to me of destructive assessment. Make sure that you're assessing what you intend to assess and don't just give a child 0.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Linda. Really some very interesting perspectives coming through there. So what we'd like to do now is we're going to just open the floor, and we're going to spend some time just between the 5 of you. I'm going to be very quiet in the background. We're going to just really have a discussion around the points that you have raised, and give everybody a chance to engage with each other around some of the points, and particularly I think if one's looking at the different perspectives that have come through from the 3 of you, which is actually very interesting, is really around understanding the overall picture in terms of assessment, and how that plays out in reality as well. So I think it's I'm going to just leave it at that, and we're going to just let the creative juices and that flow here, just to give you a chance to really engage with each other. And Ian and Sipho also will be giving their thoughts and opinions as well. I know we had some discussion earlier around just some of the things that came through in the discussion in the document you sent through, and I know that there was a lot of discussion we had around how interesting it was to get that information through, and I think all 3 of you have touched on those points in your introduction, so thank you very much. And we'll have a discussion for about half an hour, and then we're going to be working through and just summarizing, and then we'll be ending off inside the hour. So thank you very much for that. So yeah, over to you all. And I don't know who wants to kick off, but by all means, yeah, Sipho, you
I'll kick it off. very interesting perspectives, from everybody that's shared. And as a result, there's a whole bunch of things jumping around in my head. But one of those things is where there's an assessment, we assume that there's an assessor, right? We assume that there's somebody who is looking for something, somebody who is measuring and assessing. And I think for me, that's one of the issues at hand when we talk about assessment, whether done correctly, constructively, destructively. There's this flaw in the system, in my view, and that flaw is the assessor, because the assessor, I think Ellen alluded to a lot of how that plays out in school. The assessor is hardly ever objective. They come with a certain viewpoint, they come with a certain perspective, they come with a certain bias, if I could even put it, as far as that. Which begs the question, is there ever really a fair assessment, right? And if the answer is no, there's no fair assessment, then why are we assessing? What are we assessing for? And if there's no fair assessor, there's no fair assessment, which means, the result can never be fair. So for me, it opens up a whole other discussion. And I've got two examples from my own experience. For example, in grade 4, grade 5, I don't know, I remember this story for some reason, but in geography, I had a wonderful geography teacher, Mrs. Jones. I think she was in her 60s. She was retired when she taught me in primary school and eventually taught me again in high school. I don't know how she managed to do that, but she was a lovely lady, right? Passionate about what she did. She taught us geography. And I remember this one test where we had to name all the clouds, right? As a second language English speaker, that was a huge challenge for me, because the names of clouds are really complex. I just remember one, cumulus. I don't even know that's correct. But I just remember those names being terribly difficult to memorize. And I tried my level best. And I failed that test like completely, okay? But I could accept that because I had the answers in front of me. It was just a matter of me memorizing that and recalling it in a test. There was no trick to it. I was just asked to recall a bunch of facts. I couldn't do that. So I understood why I failed the test, right? In my view, that was a fair test. I knew exactly what I was being asked. Fast forward now, I'm in grade 10, creative writing, which is one of the things I love. We asked to write a story, and I write the story, man, and I sit back and I think this is the best creative writing I've ever done in my life. I've got the characters down, I've got even the music. It's like a movie, it's playing out in my head. And I'm thinking, actually, I'm gonna ace this assessment, but better than that, I'm gonna create like a movie or a series or something, because this is that good, right? My script comes back and I failed. And I don't get it. I mean, why did I fail? What did my teacher not like the story? Was there anything technical that I got wrong? I just could not understand why I failed in a creative writing piece. Because there was no real feedback. Yeah, some grammatical issues here and there, which I understood. But in terms of a creative writing piece, I couldn't see how I failed that, because I produced a creative piece of work. And I think from then on, I began to understand the subjectivity of assessment, right? Because throughout my undergrad, that is how I was assessed. Did a lot of essays in my undergrad. And there's a certain element where you have to get certain facts right. But a lot of it is how one interprets the knowledge, right? And contextualizes it according to the question that is being asked. But I had huge issues with the professors that taught, because every time I thought I had a really good creative argument, from their perspective, I didn't. Okay, so after a few times of failing and going around this cycle, I thought, no, I need to have conversations with people, because I keep taking this one's advice and feedback. I apply it to the next. The next is looking for something else, completely rubbish is what I've learned from the previous professor. Now I've got to relearn this professor's style, produce something according to, okay, this is going to help me with the next assessment. I get to another person, they're looking for their own thing, right? So there's no fairness in that, okay? Which brings me to this point. I think, and Ellen raised it as well, assessment for me has to give one an opportunity to receive the feedback. So from my third, fourth year, every assignment that I did, I would take to the lecturer and say, this is what I've written. Tell me what you are looking for so that I can rise up to your standard so that I can pass this course. So I learned that skill of, look, I know you come with your bias. It's no use me trying to read your mind. There's something specifically you're looking for. Let me get that from you. We have it on record, and I'll try my very best to please you, the assessor, because I've realized actually it's not about my knowledge. It's actually about pleasing the assessor at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So for me that which is completely wrong, and so for me that becomes the issue about when we start talking about creativity, and how do we assess creativity? If there's this, proverbial assessor who is looking for something, but they would never really ordinarily communicate what they're looking for to a student or the person that is being assessed, especially when it comes to something as abstract as creativity. Understand the technical elements, very easy to understand what technically is being required from you, even from a work space, even from a classroom point of view. But the minute you talk about creativity and creative thinking and problem solving, there's a lot of multiple ways of approaching a problem from a creative perspective. But now, how do you assess that, right? How do you assess that fairly? Is there such a thing as assessing creativity fairly? I think that's the
okay. So thoughts
that's the
on
question
that,
really I want to throw to all of us.
I think that's very interesting. I mean, thoughts on that aspect. I think.
Or does it even matter?
Yeah, and I mean, Tankisa, I think you raised that in your feedback as well around how that applies in perhaps in a different context, in industry or in the business context. It's interesting to look at that, because do you very often people will do things to please the person that they need to please, rather than actually give their own opinion about what they believe is right and should happen, and that stunts creativity. I think it was very interesting. Any thoughts on that and any other points? Please carry on.
Can I chip in? Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
For me, there's this terrible tragedy of the first industrial revolution. So the current assessment in schools, globally, you measure only the content and the procedural knowledge, and there are no assessments, it's just tests to be true. I mean, there's just this constant barrage of testing content and procedural knowledge, which is obviously very important. So I loved Linda's point of, teaching the 2D trick and then saying, okay, now apply this to this 3-dimensional real world problem. And so that enables the creativity and the fun and so on. But you don't want to write a test in 3D. You actually want to go and investigate it and get interested in, all that sort of stuff. And so essentially, all of you gave wonderful examples of the tragedy of where we are. I mean, Ellen sort of said, it can't be simple recall. Well, guess what, Ellen? As far as I know, I mean, you have some boy being asked to list the colors of the rainbow, and because he gets them the wrong way around, he fails. And then someone gets asked for the body parts of a grasshopper. I mean, you can go and get the body parts off the internet anytime you want. You don't need to learn what the body parts of a grasshopper or an ant are. And then SIPO's beautiful one of name the clouds. I mean, who cares what they're called? And we want to know why they formed that way. Why do they look so different? What are all the processes? You know, go and investigate that. So the current tragedy for me is this first industrial revolution overhang that's still sitting in our education system, certainly in South Africa. I mean, really badly so. And that's all it is. And SIPO's point last month was you value what is assessed. So if we keep on giving these trivial tests on procedures and content knowledge, that's what everyone's going to value. The parents value it, the teachers value it. I have teachers who literally take their own trig tests very seriously. They look at them and think, oh, this one's doing really well and this one's doing really badly. Whereas actually it's a trivial bunch of nonsense. I mean, who cares if you know some of that stuff? Because you can find all the trig questions from a trick on the internet now. You can find easy ones, medium ones, difficult ones. You can find the questions, you can find the solutions. You can do it all yourself. You don't need to bother with anyone else. So that's the first thing. Where we need to go is what you're all describing, which is the children need to have the freedom to actually use whatever knowledge they're learning. So they do need to know that knowledge. They do need to know some procedures. But we actually need to give them the freedom to use it and take those things further. So if you learn about 2D trig, there's nothing more exciting than learning for yourself how to use it in 3 dimensions. It's really exciting because you can now move around the room. You're not just forced onto the plane. And there are many examples of that. I mean, the clouds, if all you're doing is worrying about the names of the clouds instead of how they actually formed, it's just so ridiculous. So I know, Ellen, I know you and I have been working sometimes on Shaya's Cat 1 and Cat 2, but for me at the moment, I'm working on 4 different sets of trying to assess learning. First one is essentially the old style. You look at the domains of mathematical reasoning. So one of them might be trigonometrical reasoning, but you look at it in terms of cognitive levels. So every single class that you're teaching, doesn't matter whether it's grade 8 or grade 12, you have all the cognitive levels right in front of you. So you can't talk about trig properly unless you know where the children are, so that you can listen to a child and then do the right thing for that child, whatever it is. I mean, you've got to be able to have that knowledge. So Shaya's got this, it's called Cat 1, but essentially it's got the 9 domains of mathematical reasoning across the top. And then it's got 4 or 5 or 6 levels that are sort of paragraphs where they explain what a child at a particular level is going to be doing with their trigonometry or their space and shape or their data at that level. So whatever task you give the child, you should be able to quite quickly see where the child is actually reasoning, so that you can treat that child with dignity, number one, listen to them, hear what they're actually thinking, because they will be being creative. They will be thinking for themselves at that level. And then you got to find a way to challenge them so that they can hopefully, over time, it doesn't happen over a week, over time they can steadily accelerate their way through the levels and end up absolutely wonderful. So that's the Cat 1, and it's probably the one that's closest to what's currently doing. The second one of Shaya's really excites me. It's called Cat 2. It's a really interesting, boring name. But essentially what he does, he breaks it into 5 different things, and I'll read them for you. One is interpreting maths info. So how does a child interpret maths info? So again, there are 5 levels. So he describes in 5 different paragraphs what a child will do about interpreting maths information, depending on what level of reasoning they're at whatever stage of their lives. So remember, some grade 8s are in front of grade 12s. So there are some grade 8s who are thinking at a much higher level than some grade 12s. So you've got to be able to know what you're doing. The second one is choosing the right maths knowledge or selecting the maths for a particular task. So again, he describes in 5 paragraphs how that choosing process goes on. Because, you know, if you're going to solve a maths problem, choosing what maths info you're going to use is a really big part of solving a problem. And so you can assess that. You can listen to a child. The child can explain to you why they're doing it or what they're using. And you can interpret that information yourself so you can choose or see how you can help them. The third one is in relationships. So he again has 5 paragraphs at the levels of how kids see relationships between the different strands. So the relationship between shape and space and number, or the relationship between data and number, or, you know, there are lots of relationships in maths, and it's a very important part of learning. TIMCA, so you talked about the holistic stuff. I mean, in maths, you've got to be holistic as well within maths. Otherwise, you basically learn a whole lot of useless information. You can't apply it anywhere. So that's the third one of 5. And then the fourth one is your interest and your investigation style. So children, when they're at the early stages of their reasoning development, they don't get interested for that long. They have a fairly short interest span. So you've got to know that, so that you give them different things to keep them interested. Whereas ones who are at the more developed stages, they can get taken in for something for a hang of a long time. They can go and investigate for days and they won't come back to you. So he describes again in 5 paragraphs what he calls the interest and investigation style. And the final one is what he puts just under the word systems. So understanding the system of anything. I mean, there's so many systems in learning of maths. So how many people understand the system of integers? So what stage are you in your understanding of integers as a system, not just as a bunch of rules that you're learning? And so again, there are 5 paragraphs. So if you look at those 2 cats, they're actually brilliant, because it gives you 2 things that you can look at when you're listening to a child. How is this child going in the actual mathematical domain stuff? And at what level are they on? So you're looking at from the perspective of the task, the mathematical task. And the other one, you're looking at it from this perspective of the child as a person and as a learner. So it's again in their maths, but it's a different perspective. You're not worrying about the task, you're worrying about the child and how the child is thinking. So those are brilliant. And then I've added on 2 more because of some of the other things that you said, all of you. One is, I call it well-being. So try to measure the well-being of a child. And there are 5 parts to that. I won't go through them, but there are 5 things that are actually quite easy to measure when you're trying to work out how well someone is. But I think it's very important. If I listen to all of you talking about the anxiety and the stress and the judgment and all those words that are quite scary words, that so people get damaged, very seriously damaged by that stuff. And so if you don't measure the well-being of all your children, and they're all different, you can't all sit at a well-being test and mark it. It's got to be done by observation, and you have to have this tool that I'm trying to put together to help you work out where the well-being level is. And then finally, the one, and I think it's particularly useful, in creativity and problem solving, it's your emotional awareness level. So how aware are you? Because, you know, it's really good to feel anxious in a problem solving situation, but not too anxious. So you need to enjoy feeling anxious, but you mustn't get too anxious. And you need to be aware of that. So you're controlling, if you become aware that, oh, I'm sort of just stuck, it's very important to know what it feels like emotionally to be stuck, and that it's okay. So if you learn how to be aware of your emotional state, you can become a hang of a good mathematician, a really good creative problem solver. But you're not going to be creative unless you're really chilled, because creative people have to take huge risks. They've got to anything goes before you can. So I'm trying to give you some idea that where we need to go to, in my opinion, is to a completely different style of assessment.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's all marks in South Africa. Stipo now spent a couple of years in grade 8 and 9. It's relentless tests on content and procedural knowledge, very high stakes, determines whether you can go on with maths. It fails in South Africa. At the moment, it's more than 90% of the children are being failed and kicked out of maths before they get to grade 9. Now that is a crime against humanity, in my opinion.
So
but that's what's happening. It's happening every single day, all over South Africa.
And you were saying earlier, Ian, that if you look at the UK system, and Alan, you could probably comment here. I mean, you're looking at maybe 15% of children that go through to grammar school. Is that a fair assessment, or?
Yeah, 20 to 15%. Yeah, but I think it's false, because there's in the south of the country, there's a whole industry of coaching. So they're coaching them to pass the test, not to have any knowledge. I mean, just one thing I'd like to share before we finish is, I got a glimpse of a project that I thought was really good from the point of view of the pupils, using solo taxonomy.
Yes.
Where what was happening is they were training once a month 14 and 15-year-olds to use solo to answer more challenging questions in science. And what I felt was quite good about it, it wasn't saying to the child, you've failed. You'll say, well, you've only mentioned one single thing, that's unistructural. Can you mention 2 or 3? And then it says, can you relate them together? And so the children were trained through past papers to actually start making connections and to give much more sophisticated answers, which, when a lot of schools have done an analysis, they're the ones where the children fall down on. So that stopped because of lockdown, and I don't know when it'll start again. I was going to be involved in it and trained in it. And I thought that had a lot of potential for supporting the students, because it seemed to, why I mentioned it was it resonated with what Ian was saying, but from the pupil's point of view. So it wasn't, you're not good enough. It was the fact, actually, it's a bit like the Carol Dweck mindset. You actually haven't answered. You've done it with 1 point. You should have done 2. Or could you have connected them together? And they were training the students to pick out key words and connect them together, because one of the questions was about water, changing state, and children getting the question wrong, where some children couldn't answer why there was a heater in a car windscreen, kind of thing, to turn this ice into a liquid water. So it was things like that. And it was those very, very simple questions that as teachers, you bang your head against the wall, because the children, one classic was osmosis, where in a biology paper a couple of years ago, they had a question on osmosis with carrots. They'd all done it on potatoes, and they came out, it was all over social media. The teachers had not taught us about carrots. We've just done about potatoes. And you just think, it's almost as if when it gets to the end, we start to see what's missing in the tools we're giving the children in the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's quite fascinating. So, I mean, Linda, you nodding your head a lot there, and then Tankiso, I can see as well, is also very engaged in terms of this, because it does have quite a big impact in business as well, from that point of it. Linda, your perspectives on that?
Yeah, well, it just keeps popping into my head as you're all speaking that children have got so used to now their teachers saying to them, just write what the examiner wants to hear. And it's so desperately sad that you are actually being told not to think for yourself. And in the recent past, we've noticed this absolute rush for everybody to do history as a subject at school. Now, when I was at school, history was a huge subject, and we were quite scared of a history exam because they threw in lots of cartoons. You had to make lots of sort of associations and things. So it was that was higher grade history, obviously, but it was quite literally higher grade. And now it seems to me, and I don't know a lot about history teaching, but it seems to me that they are just coached into writing essays. So they kind of learn, this is what the question's going to be, this is what your answer must be. And it's such a waste of a subject because they are not being taught to think. So yes, Seaport comes back to your question of, as long as you say what the examiner wants to hear, what you know the memo says, and it's great talking as a maths teacher where, it's right or it's wrong, but it isn't actually always that simple. When you're marking geometry, you don't really use the memo. But yes, don't think for yourself, just write what the examiner wants. And then suddenly when you get to university, maybe you have to think for yourself, or maybe you still, as you say, have professors that don't want you to think for yourself. And then one day you're going to get into the business world and you're going to have to think for yourself, or you're going to lose your job. And you're going to make big mistakes, and you're not going to have learned how to figure out how to fix your mistakes. So we are, it's very sad, the way we are training children. They're asking us now, just tell us what's in the exam. Yeah. Now we're being told you're only going to write a little test. We're only going to write a little short exam. Please just tell us what's in the exam. Because it's not external, whereas it's been external for grade 9, 10, 11, and 12 for the past number of years. Now it's internal. So already we're feeling this pressure that parents are going to start demanding that we send the scope for all the exams. And that word scope is like a 5-letter swear word to me when it comes to exams. I'm not going to tell you what's in the exam. I've taught you the work. I'm confident that you've been taught. Now you need to think for yourself and answer the paper. That's where I'm at. Yeah.
I think the irony in all of it is that we actually producing what we are producing, right? But we are surprised at the results. What do I mean by that? Is throughout the 12 years of initial schooling, we expect people to be very good at recalling facts and applying procedures. Yes. Yet the output that we're expecting is these creative problem solvers who are confident in their own abilities to think and to work and to solve problems. And then we are surprised, that we are getting less and less doctors, less engineers, less entrepreneurs, or the standard is getting less and less, is going down. But it's because that's what we are producing for an entire 12 years. No wonder, unemployment is, look at that. I'm simplifying the matter. There's a lot of other issues at play, but I'm saying that how our system is designed with how unemployed we are as a nation, because not many make it out to the other end of the spectrum, right? Think of it, how the numbers dwindle. Just from learners who are able to get through to matric, learners who are able to pass matric and get to university, it becomes less and less. Into the professional degrees, that becomes less and less, because institutions of higher learning expect something very different than what is being produced in initial primary and high school schooling. So again, for me, it goes back to that issue of it will always be what we value. So a conversation about assessment is actually really a conversation about how do we rethink what we value, and begin to let that inform what we assess in schools, right? And I think we all agree, we're not saying take away the procedural skills and the rules of every subject that everyone needs, but let that not be all. Because at the end of the day, what we're expecting is for them to use those rules, to apply those procedures in their creative thinking, right? And that requires for them to be confident in their abilities. That requires for them to just their well-being as well, right? It speaks to their well-being emotionally and psychologically. If you tell a child that they amount to nothing because they failed a procedural test, the knock-on effect is actually really, really much deeper than that. You are telling that person that they will never rise up to a certain level, which is completely wrong. They've just failed one little minute test that in the greater scheme of things, actually, like Ian mentioned, means absolutely nothing.
Thank you. So how do you see that playing out in the business world? Because it's very interesting in the practical sense?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I just want to just raise a point, right, based on what Sipo had said about, there not necessarily being objective assessments, right? And that there's always some sort of bias that is there. And, I think while that may be true, I do think that there's still room to engage with, with the teachers or the lecturers, right? Based on whatever ideas that you bring to the table. So one of the things that I'd mentioned was, we need to, assess creative problem solving skills. And, I said that we could give people real life challenges, right? Those that have been solved or ones that haven't been resolved yet. And now, of course, particularly when dealing with challenges that haven't been resolved yet, we do not have a correct answer, right? Because we don't know. There's a course that I did in my postgrad called Business, Society, and Collective Action. And one of the things that we're to deal with is what they call the wicked problems. And those are problems that have, many sort of different challenges, and there isn't like, one silver bullet to solving those problems, right? But I do, so one of the things that I found, in terms of my engagements with the lecturer was that, you'd say something and you'd have to justify it, right? So let's say we're dealing with, I remember one of the issues that we had to grapple with was the issue of housing. Right. So what the government had done is that they, built some RDP houses in annex, right? And then what they found is that the people who, were given those houses were not the people who occupied those houses, right? And that, those people, in fact, went back to staying in the shacks. They either rented out, those houses and whatnot, right? And, I think when you're dealing with that kind of challenge, right? And if you're an assessor, and someone has given you a solution, you would judge the solution based on on its possibility to solving that particular problem, right? Because on one end there could be an issue of unemployment, right? Maybe that's one of the big issues. Another issue is that people have just found that it's okay to actually live in a shack, and you don't need these houses. Right, and there could be various problems, right? But I think when a person assesses, they have to assess, the merits of what you're saying. Yes, there might be certain biases, but there's certain things that even in your creative thinking, there are certain things that still remain rules, right? So, for example, in this example that I've just shared, if I bring forward an issue and say, okay, guys, we actually need to solve for employment, right? The assessor can't necessarily mark me wrong, right? Because I can then go back and say, okay, guys, if we create employment, these people won't need to, sell their houses or rent those houses out because they already have some form of income coming in, right? So I think it's, to Sipo's, point, there still should be room to engage with the teachers, right? To disagree with the teachers as well. Where if they mark me wrong for saying no, the real issue is employment, then I need to be able to go back to them and say no, but here are the merits of it, right? And maybe bring some data as well. Say, okay, look, maybe in a particular society, people are employed and they're given, government housing, and as a result, they were able to, well, they decided to stay in those houses instead of renting those houses out. So yes, there are biases. However, I think in our creativity, particularly when looking at problem solving, we should bring some data to the table to, to justify what it is that we're putting to the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more a holistic view and very situational in terms of looking at the solution. I mean, in the instance you were speaking about, there's not one answer necessarily. And if you were assessing the success of the RDP housing at assisting people, you would have found that it was actually creating income rather than actually, doing creating housing for them, creating housing for somebody else. It's an interesting perspective on it. And in terms of the just on the business side, Tankiso, I know I've had some experience on that, but I just wanted to get your perspective on what are we producing? I mean, in terms of what you've seen in the industry coming through? Is this level of assessment and of pleasing the assessor or pleasing the person who is in control of your destiny almost, is that also something you're seeing coming through in the business world? Is it something that is it a learned behavior?
Sure. No, definitely, definitely. But I think it depends on the company culture. So one of the first jobs I had, I was very frustrated. Right. So it was in the tax consulting space, and you had to give certain opinions, right, to clients. And one of my big frustrations was that I had managers who preferred different writing styles. Right? So one manager wanted this type of writing style, another manager had a different writing style, another manager had a different writing style. Right? So whenever you had to give an opinion, you had to factor in what that manager wanted, and I felt like there wasn't as much room for creativity. And I mean, so I think in that kind of corporate environment, there is, creativity is can be stifled. And I think in certain instances, you're expected to really toe the line and do as you're told. I mean, I remember one of the things I was told was, don't think too much. There's already a precedent that is there. Just take that opinion, change it up here and there, and that's it. So there are certain, corporate cultures that have that kind of expectation, right? However, in my current role, or rather in the company that I'm in now, there's a different culture. There's a different kind of expectation. Currently, I'm expected to think creatively. There's a problem. They say, okay, dude, look, we need you to fix it. Think creatively, and yeah. So it's more about solving the problem more than the form. So I think it really depends on on the kind of first of all, I think it's the kind of work that you're doing, because in certain roles creativity is required in order to solve problems, and I think it's also about the culture, and I think that's why we find that some companies stick to what they know, and that results in some of the biggest companies in the world going under simply because they've been doing the same thing over and over again, which results in failure. And in other instances where we've got a culture of creativity, we find that those companies are able to pivot. When things change, they also change with the times. And I think it is the cultures that encourage a certain level of creative thinking and creative problem solving that are able to to really change with the times.
Yeah. And I think it's the same, I think that culture starts and Ian and myself, you find those different cultures even in the classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest things I learned from Ian is teach less, listen more, if I were to sum it up. Because the more you listen, it's the more room you create for that creativity and for that culture of creativity and that culture of problem solving. And one of the things that the best things you can do as a teacher is to throw away the expectation that you know everything, from yourself and even from your students. I think it goes the same in industry. Once you treat your employees like you know everything, you are stifling their creativity, and you are creating a very toxic company culture. And I see a lot of managers who are not humble enough to let other people shine, right? Same for me in the classroom. In the classroom, I think my work is done when at the end of the lesson, somebody remembers what a student went up to the board and did, not what I said when I taught them in the first 5 minutes of the lesson. That's not what it's about. For me, success is when they first go to their mate and ask, how can we solve this problem, instead of running to the teacher, because that's the culture you're trying to create, and that's the culture that is going to enable them to thrive in any industry that they go into, where they look into themselves, believe in themselves, and believe in the collaborative power of whoever they are working with to solve problems, as opposed to look to one individual for all the knowledge or for all the problems. offer all the solutions to all the problems, you know? So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
In the business world, going to quickly, so the World Economic Forum about 10 years ago, they started a whole new language. So they were all dying because of what was coming out of the schools. And so they created this fourth industrial revolution thing in education. They also started trying to describe what they wanted. And one of the phrases used to irritate me. They used to talk about the need for critical thinking skills. It used to irritate me because I don't know what critical thinking skills are. Anyway, they have since defined it. And so listen to this. It's from the World Economic Forum. And the definition is 3 things. 1, your thinking is original. So, Tankiso, your current group that you're working with, 10 out of 10. You go into an average maths classroom, 0 out of 10. Your thinking is not original. You're just spoon-fed and have to spit it back. The second part is your thinking is self-directed. So again, go into any old maths classroom and you'll find the teachers directing all of it. But my understanding of your current employment, whoever you're working with, you are self-directing your own problem solving, and it's extremely useful. And then the last part of the definition, which I think is delightful, is your thinking is effective. So it doesn't matter as long as you get a solution to the problem, or as long as you manage to work out how to work in 3D instead of 2D with your trigonometry. It's got to be effective. And so I think our current system is failing terribly on those 3 definitions of critical thinking skills. That's the problem. And I think assessment is what's causing it. So we've got to...
You get what you train the children for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's it. We do it. We do it well. The system wants it, then we do it well. So yeah.
It's right. What in business we say, what gets measured gets done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly exactly the same principle. Is essentially you direct behavior based on what you set as being the criteria against which you measure the result. And so if you set the wrong measure, then you're going to get the wrong result. But ultimately, it comes a lot to what, I mean, there's been a lot of talk around the assessor. What does the assessor want? And that the outcome is based on what the assessor wants, is what I hear is coming through. There's also a lot of that then takes away reasoning from the equation, because you're then directing reasoning in a specific way. So it's been very interesting listening to the different viewpoints. We are out of time, I know, by a fair amount of time already, but it is I didn't want to stop anybody talking. It's this could go on for another, we could stay here all night, I think, and still discuss this topic. But maybe if I could just ask for just Alan, from your side, maybe some final sort of summarizing thoughts. I'd appreciate it from your side. I think it's been interesting to listen to everybody else talking.
I think from my point of view, what's been coming into my mind as people have been talking is where, as a teacher, if you have an opportunity to let children think, you kind of have to celebrate that when it happens. So I've been having little incidents of where children, I've just gone, wow. I remember teaching a boy who was 11. It was happened to be a maths lesson on comparing textbooks and which one's harder. And he said, well, I think it's the ratio of consonants to vowels. And this little boy just said this, and I just said, I knew his dad. So I said, he's just brilliant. And that boy, he went to Oxford, but that was seeing the potential in his brain at 10. So for me, it comes down to a teacher being able to see the potential and see beyond the system that we're in, and celebrate that. And I think we all. I remember one teacher when I was 14. The only teacher that liked me was an art teacher, and said he can do some good stuff, because I was going off the rails at school a bit, and I've remembered him all my life. Mr. Langford, I remember his name, because he saw something in me, and it's like your opinion changes. So when you see these things in the children, you warm to them, the relationship changes, and you move on together. And so for me, it's maybe that's, and then recently I've met a few children I've taught, and they've said to me, oh, I really liked his lessons. And you start to think, I gave you loads and loads of tests, but it comes back to this, can you then see the person and help them to move on, whether they're going to be a science teacher or not? My own children, one might be a vet, one's a historian, but you've seen potential in them. And I think it's seeing them, and whether it's the smallest child or anybody really. So I think for me, that was what was coming through my mind. It's that one incident that makes the difference, that can transform them.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really very nice way to sum up. Thank you very much, Alan. Just in terms of the next steps, what we would like to do is, we will continue this debate in whatever form, it's going to take as we go forward. One of the important things that we will try and summarize what has been discussed, and pick up again on some of the key themes that came through from today and from your written feedback to us. And one of the key things that we're wanting to explore is really, how do we bridge the divide that exists, this massive chasm that seems to exist between what we believe is good education, what is good assessment, and what the world should look like into the future in terms of how we take it forward and where we are now. So there is an element of bridging that needs to take place. And how does that, what form does that take? How does that work? And we'll be having a bit of some discussion ourselves around that. We'll be putting out some thinking around that as well. And we want to be discussing that perhaps in the next session. If we feel perhaps we haven't quite touched on everything we want to discuss here around reasoning and various other, maybe the critical thinking definition that we heard, which I think was outstanding, is that we can delve into that in more detail. It's very much around having this kind of discussion, and getting to really understand where the collective minds here have been it's really outstanding. So thank you so much for your input today, and we will send out, as I say, the summaries. I will put the recording of this out to everybody, so you can go back through it again if you want to pick up on key points or things that you hadn't, that you wanted to look back on. I'll let you know where that address will be, and we will take it from there. But just again, thank you very much for your time. I don't know if Ian or Sipo, you wanted to just say anything in closing from our side.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to think how we get to school.
Go ahead, Ian. Go ahead. Age before beauty.
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine a school built like Tancreso's current business, because that sounds like the perfect school to me. Your culture that you describe of your current work, and compared with that lodge where you had to try and write it for a particular manager, so you had to get his, that for me is the old school. That's what schools look like now. So I'm trying to imagine, how can we get a school that sort of resembles your current work environment? I mean, that seems to be what I'd like to see.
Thank you, Ian, very much. Sipo, on your side.
Yeah, along the same lines, really, that, every day we are presented with new opportunities to reimagine what is important, to reimagine what is valuable. And that will never be one thing. Some things will remain constant, but things evolve. The world that we live in today is certainly not the same world we were in 6 months ago, yet alone 5 years ago. So we can either be stuck in one particular way of thinking because it's the system, it's set up that way. Or we can actually be really responsive to where the world is going, inform where the world is going. As dynamic as that process might be, that's part of the excitement, that's part of the reason why we need to always be responding in creativity. But let that which we value, inform then how we do everything else. instead of just being stuck, imagining something, on one end, but being stuck in one way of doing things, yet we expect different results. But let's reimagine what we value the right thing, I think, through conversations like this, debate what we think should be valuable, and let that inform everything else and what we build in order to have this valuable output, whatever we think it is.
Thanks.
And it's good to see everybody again.
Yeah, very good. And thank you. I just wanted to just finish off, just say thank you to all three of you for sharing your personal stories, and really just, it was incredibly insightful, and I just really wanted to say thank you for that. It is often very difficult to lay your soul bare to people you don't know, and I think that certainly for me was something that just touched a nerve with me, because it certainly, I didn't necessarily, it's been from a schooling point of view in that aspect, I think it's been something that certainly has been really insightful. So thank you very much. I know I'm repeating myself all the time here, but that's so, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in a month's time. We'll give you the all that information out, and we'll ask you to put your thinking caps on again. We won't be asking you to do too much homework next time. We look forward to chatting to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.